Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Google Pixel 3a XL and see how this specific phone holds up in 2022. Now what's so funny is I personally believe that the A lineup from the Google Pixel series are some of the best phones that Google makes, and for this specific price tag, I'm actually really happy about them. Now I don't think they're perfect, and I kind of do think that their main successor afterwards are typically the better phones, but in this specific case, I think the first initial lineup from the A series of devices was super promising, and I don't think Google has actually taken an L on any single A series of device. Their Pixel lineup, yes, the 3XL was weird, the 4s were a little weird, but since the 4s they've been pretty decent. With the Pixel 3a, 4a, and 5a, I think they've all been really great phones, and if you're on the extreme budget tier end, it doesn't really get too much better than this. I mean, there are better options, like if you want to go in the used market, and if you want to buy like a used phone of this year for a flagship, it may be a little bit better. Like I would say the Galaxy S10 is a much better phone than this thing, but this is still a very good option, and for a cheap phone, it is a really decent option in terms of software and everything that you're getting with. So I'll leave these phones and some other ones linked down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now starting with the exterior of these devices, the front of this phone had a 6-inch OLED panel. Now that is a really big screen even in 2019. Nowadays we have like 6.7 and 6.9 inch panels, but back in 2019, just 3 years ago, we had phones like the Galaxy S10, the iPhone 11s that also had kind of, big panels, but this one was a kind of a big phone, mostly because it was a longer phone with a thicker bezel at the top and the bottom. A lot of phones in this specific year pretty much had, the kind of a bezel-less design. We had maybe a hole punch display, but because this was a budget phone, it was kind of expected for the design. But also when you looked at the Pixel 3 XL, that phone was very strange. Google really took an L. I've been saying take an L so much right now, but they actually kind of, made the Pixel 3 XL look so ugly, and I was not a fan of that at all, to be honest. It was very promising. Fortunately, it didn't look that great. This one looked so much better. Although I didn't feel as good as that phone, I think this one looked so much better, and I was so happy Google went with this approach rather than going something like the Pixel 3 XL, to be honest. Now we have a USB Type-C port on the bottom of this thing. We also have a headphone jack as well, which is so cool. Having a headphone jack like this is so awesome, and personally, I like seeing this type of capability with a phone that, where the main flagship didn't have a headphone jack. So that was actually very funny. On the back, we had pretty much a plastic frame. We had a plastic back on this thing as well. We had a little bit of like a shiny, top portion, which was cool. Fingerprint sensor on the back as well. And we also had that single camera setup. Now with the build quality and everything, like I said, it didn't feel as premium as the Pixel 3 XL, but I was still super happy with the design. And with this thing costing as much as it did, I think it was totally understandable. And I personally don't think this was like a super, cheap feeling phone for the price tag. It wasn't a premium feeling phone, but it didn't feel cheap because of its price, in my opinion. So in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up. Now in terms of the camera setup, this thing on the back does have that 12.2 megapixel sensor on the back, and it also has an 8 megapixel front facing camera. Nowadays, compared to the phones and even the cameras of 2019, there were basically all the phones at that time that had multiple sensors on the back. Unfortunately, the 3a XL only had a single sensor, but also, the Pixel 3 XL only had a single sensor, so it didn't really make too much of a difference between these two phones. But there were a lot of phones in this genre. You had the iPhone SE at this time too, that also had a single camera setup. So there were still a lot of phones, and the iPhone XR that Apple was still selling with a single camera, so this thing wasn't super outdated in my opinion. When I look at this camera nowadays, it's definitely not a bad camera. I think the quality is still pretty decent, but it is lacking a lot of things that we would consider pretty normal nowadays. So it's lacking any extra sensors. We don't have an ultra wide or a telephoto lens. It's pretty much lacking 4K at 60 on the back. That's another big thing that pretty much every single phone has had since then, and this one does not have it. And it's lacking 4K at 60 on the front in any capability. So there's no 4K at 60 on the front of the back of this phone, which is okay, but it would have been nice had we had it. The Pixel 3 XL actually had a dual camera setup on the front, so this one lacked that as well, which most phones don't have dual camera setups anymore. But that is another thing that was kind of interesting with this device as well. Now I will tell you, for certain applications, including social media apps, Androids don't typically work too well with those. So if you're trying to get a Pixel 3a XL and you're a heavy user in Snapchat or TikTok or Instagram and using the native cameras within them is not going to be the best look, and you may not have the best experience within them, but I think it's good enough for the most part, and I don't think it's going to be a crazy big issue for a majority of people out there. So in terms of that probably ends up covering that specific portion in my opinion. Now moving on to the software, like I mentioned before, this was actually one of the better aspects of this specific device. I think something like the Pixel 3a XL, having a stock software phone like this gives you a much better experience than you would ever believe ever in your life. Having a phone that's pretty much just in the background, not sucking up too many resources, not only gives you a smoother experience with less choppiness and all that, but it also gives you a much faster performing phone, and also in my opinion it increases the battery life as well, because you don't have a lot of different moving pieces and a lot of different processes going on in the background. So personally, I think that's a really cool thing that Google does, where they kind of just give you a really smooth performing phone with the software. But also another big thing is that with the Pixel 3a XL, you're getting a custom ROM capability and custom ROM community behind this phone as well. So even if you wanted to go ahead and not, maybe I think it's done getting software support natively now, but you can easily go and find custom ROMs for this thing too. So that's another really cool advantage that you have with this specific device. So in terms of that aspect, I think this phone is still a pretty decent option when it comes down to that. Now this phone, in terms of performance standpoint, it has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 670 chipset inside, Adreno 615 GPU, and there was only ever one version of this phone, the 64GB model with 4GB of RAM. Now, when it comes down to this specific device, I think this phone still is in a really good spot when it comes down to its performance standpoint. Now, it's not the fastest phone in the world, and it is missing a lot of big things that we have nowadays. I mean, most phones nowadays come with like a base, at least like 6 to 8GB of RAM, and that's like on the low end. Most phones nowadays will go up to like, 12GB of RAM easily. With something like this specific phone, I kind of think that, it's in a really good spot where it doesn't have a lot of moving pieces in the background. It doesn't really require a crazy amount of resources for this specific device. So I think when it comes down to this performance, it's kind of what you would expect for a 3-year-old budget phone. And I don't think it's like a crazy great performing phone, even when you consider the price tag. I look at some phones like the Pixel 4a, they did a really good job with that phone. Even the Pixel 5a, I think Google did a much better job with the performance of those phones than they did with the performance of this phone this year or in 2019. So when I look back at the Pixel 4a that came out the year after this, that's a much better performing phone than this thing is, which is expected, but the gap is crazy. The 4a to the 5a, not a crazy big gap. The 3a XL to the 4a, I think that was a pretty decent gap in my opinion. So when it comes down to the performance of this phone, I would definitely say more of a pro than a con, but it is starting to kind of show its age. I'm sure if you custom ROM this thing, there will probably be some speed improvements there. But that's kind of how it's some of the performance standpoint of this specific phone. Now we also have a 3700 mAh battery in this specific device as well, and that's a pretty good sized battery to have on like a budget tier phone. So I think that's another really cool advantage that we have with a device like this. Again, not quite maybe like the biggest battery of all time anymore, but back in 2019, again, for a budget tier device, Google did a really decent job with this phone, even in the battery capacity standpoint as well. So when I kind of go ahead and look back and to kind of sum up this whole entire video, I think Google did a great job with their whole entire A lineup. And even with the Pixel 3a XL, it's funny, this was the only XL we ever got in the A lineup. We never got a Pixel 4a. Well, we got the A5G, I guess. So that was kind of like an XL model. But I look at the Pixel 3a XL, this was a solid phone, and I think Google did a great job. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. I don't think this phone was the most perfect phone of all time. But for its price tag, I think Google did a pretty decent job, and I'm actually proud that they made the A lineup, because instead of, focusing on just the main flagships, they can go ahead every once in a while and make a new A device and get Android and get stock Android in more of the people's hands. So I kind of like the 3A lineup, but I like the 3A XL as well. So that kind of covers it. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.